Her son mocked her at his wedding, into the microphone. Carolyn Brandt, widowed accountant and mother of one, didn't flinch. Zach, the golden boy she'd financed into adulthood, raised his glass as the guests laughed on cue. By morning, every account, asset, and future inheritance tied to his name would vanish. She'd paid for the venue, the dress, and his new beginning. Now she was paying herself back. When the joke reached the world, he'd learn what the punchline really cost. All right. Before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Carolyn sat at her assigned table, far from the center of attention, in the corner near the restrooms. It wasn't by accident. She had made sure of it. The table was close enough to the dance floor that she could watch without being noticed, but not so close that she would have to participate. That wasn't why she was here. She wasn't here to be celebrated. She was here because she had paid for the venue, and everyone knew it. Zach stood at the head of the room, microphone in hand, his loud laugh cutting through the chatter. He was so at ease, too comfortable in his own skin, like he had been born for the spotlight. It wasn't a surprise. Zach had always been the one to take center stage. She had raised him that way after all. She had provided, supported, ensured he got everything he wanted. But now, looking at him, she wondered if he had ever truly appreciated it. Let's be honest, Zach's voice rang out, amplified by the mic, and Carolyn felt her pulse quicken. She's only here because she paid for the venue. The words dropped like a stone in the room. There was a brief silence, followed by a nervous ripple of laughter, but no one laughed harder than Zach. His grin stretched wide, a smirk that said more than the words ever could. He was proud of himself, proud of his joke, proud of the sting it would leave. Carolyn didn't laugh. She didn't smile. She didn't even blink. She simply sat there, her fingers wrapped around the base of her champagne flute, eyes fixed on her son. The sound of the crowd fading into the background, she could only hear the ringing in her ears, the tightness in her chest. Chelsea stood next to Zach, her expression tight. A thin smile stretched across her face. She didn't correct him. She didn't step in to stop it. She just smiled. That practiced, polite smile that never reached her eyes. It wasn't the first time Carolyn had seen it, and it wouldn't be the last. But it still stung. Amanda, the videographer, was in the background, her camera trained on the couple. Carolyn noticed the way Amanda's eyes flicked uncomfortably to the side, then down to her lens, clearly uncomfortable with what had just been said. But Amanda wasn't here to capture the truth. She was here to capture a story. A wedding story, a love story. The rest of it, the uncomfortable bits, would be edited out. Later, wouldn't it? Carolyn didn't care about the video. She didn't care about what was being captured or what anyone else thought. She had already made her choice, long before the toast. She had stopped caring about his opinion the moment he had walked away from her that morning without a single word of thanks. She had stopped caring when Chelsea smiled that tight smile at the wedding, all while pretending to forget who really made the day possible. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. The crowd chuckled nervously again, unsure how to respond. The laughter hung awkwardly in the air. Carolyn slowly lifted the champagne glass to her lips, her fingers cold against the glass. She finished it without hesitation, savoring the burn, and set the glass back down with a quiet, deliberate movement. The room around her continued its uneasy rhythm, the clink of silverware, the occasional nervous cough, the faint sounds of plates being cleared. But she was no longer a part of it. She stood up without a word, her movements slow and purposeful. The noise of the room seemed to muffle as she walked toward the door, past the guests still clapping half-heartedly at Zach's joke, past the laughter that didn't reach her. She felt a tightness in her chest, but it wasn't anger. Not yet, at least. It was something deeper, something colder. Zach had made his statement. And now, Carolyn was making hers. She wasn't going to let the moment pass quietly. She was going to make sure he understood the price of his disrespect. She had already paid for the venue. Now, it was time for him to pay. Carolyn sat at the kitchen table, the late afternoon light casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. The house was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft clink of the glass she set down on the table. Her fingers rested lightly on the edge of her laptop, the screen glowing in front of her. She had already checked her email, but she couldn't bring herself to open the ones from her son or his new wife. Instead, she opened the wire receipt for the wedding venue. The number still felt absurd, even to her. $38,700. The words seemed to blur on the page as her eyes traced the total again. It had been a gift, a gesture of love, something she thought would bond them. And yet, here she was, sitting in the quiet aftermath of a public humiliation, staring at the evidence of her mistake. She clicked over to another file, the dress deposit. Carolyn had helped with that too, another $1,000. A small gesture, compared to the venue, but significant. It wasn't just the money, it was the thought. Chelsea hadn't even mentioned it. Not a thank you note, not a word of gratitude. Carolyn exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of it all settle into her chest. She flipped through her phone, the screen now showing a post from Chelsea's Instagram, a honeymoon photo of them on a beach in Cabo. "Couples only getaway," the caption read, accompanied by a sea of hearts and smiley emojis. Not once had either of them acknowledged her. No mention of her contribution, no thanks for the venue or the countless hours she had spent planning, coordinating, writing checks. The honeymoon, the one they didn't even have to pay for, had become the final insult. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but she hesitated. Instead, she tapped her phone to open Instagram, scrolling through the flood of wedding photos. The usual hashtags were there. Just married, Itcham, our day, forever, and always. Carolyn didn't see her name anywhere, not even a thank you. Deborah had called earlier, and her words came back to her now, sharp and precise. "They want your money, not your presence." It wasn't the first time Deborah had been blunt with her, but it had stung more this time. Deborah had been right, of course, and now Carolyn had the proof. She closed the social media app and picked up the folder from the table. The manila envelope had been sitting there for days, unopened. Inside were the papers she had requested from her lawyer, her estate, her will, the money that had been spent. She slid the folder open, her fingers pausing over the documents inside. Carolyn felt the familiar tightness in her chest again, but this time it wasn't just the disappointment. It was something colder, something sharper. The urge to correct what had been broken, the desire to take back what was hers, to erase the mistakes she had made. She opened the top document labeled Revise Estate and began to read. It wasn't a new will, not yet, but a plan for change. She had always been careful with her finances, meticulous, and her trust had been designed to protect her. But now it needed an overhaul. She wasn't going to leave it all to them. Not anymore. Not after what had just happened. Carolyn grabbed her pen, her movements steady and deliberate as she began to make the first changes. Removing Zach as a beneficiary seemed like the simplest step, but there were other details to work out. She made notes in the margins, little changes that would ensure her assets went to someone who would appreciate them, her goddaughter, a few select charities. She paused for a moment, staring at the papers. The weight of her decisions pressed in on her, but she didn't feel regret. Not yet, at least. Only the sharp relief of control. The sound of the doorbell cut through her thoughts, unexpected and abrupt. Carolyn's hand froze midair, the pen hovering over the page. She glanced at the clock. Almost dinner time. Who could it be at this hour? She stood up slowly, the house creaking beneath her feet as she walked to the door. The hinges squeaked as she opened it, and there, standing on the doorstep, was Deborah. Her friend's gaze was steady, unflinching, as always. But Carolyn could tell something had shifted. There was a certain knowing in Deborah's eyes. She stepped forward without a word, as though she'd already seen the writing on the wall. "Carolyn," Deborah said quietly, her voice a mixture of concern and something else, something sharper. "It's time to take the next step." Carolyn didn't speak, only stepped aside to let her in. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and for the first time in weeks, Carolyn felt like she was no longer standing alone. As Deborah sat across from her at the table, her eyes flicked to the folder. "What are you thinking?" she asked, her voice careful but pointed. Carolyn took a breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle into her bones. "I'm thinking it's time to stop being the one who gives. Time to let them feel the cost." Deborah's lips twitched into a knowing smile. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" "No," Carolyn said, her voice calm and certain. "I'm not." Carolyn sat in the dimly lit study, the flicker of the desk lamp casting shadows across the scattered papers. Her fingers hovered over her phone, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought about the weekend, the wedding, the toast, the sharp sting of her son's words. They had all blended together into a sour aftertaste. The honeymoon photos had popped up on social media not long after. Chelsea, her new daughter-in-law, radiant in the sun-drenched paradise of Cabo, flaunting their perfect, carefree life to the world. Manifesting abundance, the caption had read. It should have felt like a joke, but to Carolyn, it felt like something worse. A reminder that none of it was real. The abundance they hadn't earned. The future they believed they controlled had been built on the back of her sacrifice. Her phone buzzed on the table, shaking her from her thoughts. It was Tanner. "Can you talk now?" Carolyn exhaled and clicked the message open. Tanner was precise, methodical, always in control of the numbers. That's why she had trusted him with the family's financial portfolio for so long. She stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from her blouse, and made her way to the adjoining office. The walls here were lined with books, and the air smelled faintly of wood polish and old paper. She sat at the desk, opening her laptop, and clicked on the encrypted file Tanner had shared with her earlier. The screen lit up with a list of accounts, balances, and investments. Carolyn scanned through the details, each one an echo of everything she had provided, everything she had built for them. Future Family Fund. The words caught her eye. The fund she had quietly set up years ago, thinking it would give Zach and his future family a cushion when the time came. The thought had been simple enough, a way to ensure their financial security, a small token of her ongoing love. Zach had never asked for it, but she had done it anyway. He had no idea that she had funded it. But now, looking at the numbers, she saw something else. This was the gift that kept on giving. At least, until she put a stop to it. Zach thought he controlled the fund, but he didn't. Not yet. Carolyn pressed her fingers to the keys, typing out the instructions. Tanner would freeze the fund. Quietly, without fanfare. She wouldn't be the one to expose it, at least not yet. Not until it was time for Zach to understand the consequences of his actions. She clicked the confirmation and felt a sharp, almost cathartic sense of closure. The money would sit there for now, untouched, as it was meant to. She sat back in her chair, staring at the screen for a long moment. There was so much more to do, so many more changes. Her eyes flicked back to her phone, which still sat on the table, flashing with notifications. Chelsea's post had lingered at the top, taunting her. The manifesting abundance seemed so frivolous now, almost obscene. Carolyn could feel the bitter smile creeping into her expression. She wasn't going to let them get away with this. Not this time. With a quick tap, Carolyn opened her email. The draft of a donation receipt stared back at her, one she'd written earlier in the day but hadn't yet sent. It wasn't for a charity Zach would approve of. It was a donation, done anonymously, to a women's shelter. The same shelter she had supported in the past, but this time it felt different. This wasn't a simple gesture. This was a statement. She clicked send. It was a small act, almost insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but it filled her with a sense of righteousness, a sense of power. She went back to her phone and scrolled through the wedding photos once again. This time, she wasn't looking for thanks. She knew she wouldn't find any. What she was looking for was something else. And there it was. A picture of Zach and Chelsea, holding hands, their smiles bright and wide, bathed in golden sunlight. They were in a world of their own, untouched by the reality Carolyn knew was coming for them. Her thumb hovered over the screen, and then she tapped it, zooming in. The soft hum of the refrigerator in the background was the only sound as she stared at the photo. She thought about all the years of giving, all the things she had done out of love, and she wondered briefly if they had ever really seen her at all. Deborah's words echoed in her mind. They have no idea what's coming. Carolyn smiled, the cold satisfaction of control finally settling in. They wouldn't know until it was too late, and by then, the damage would be done. As she locked her phone and set it down on the desk, a text came in from Deborah. "How's it going?" Carolyn's fingers hovered over the keys. "It's done." She pressed send, then leaned back in her chair, letting the weight of the moment wash over her. The game had just begun. Carolyn sat in her living room, the dim light from the television casting a cool glow across the space. She had waited until the house was silent, the weight of the day pressing down on her like a heavy cloak. The house, once full of laughter and warmth, now felt hollow, quiet except for the steady hum of the air conditioning and the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath her. The wedding video was queued up on her laptop, the file labeled uncut. She had received the link the morning after the wedding, her finger hovering over the screen for a long moment before she clicked play. The first few minutes were the usual, the drone shots of the venue, the golden light filtering through the trees, the laughter of guests as they gathered for the ceremony. She had been there, of course, seated far from the action, but this was different. This was the version of the day that no one had seen, the one the guests hadn't witnessed, the one Amanda, the videographer, had kept rolling after the smiles had faded. Carolyn had known there would be more. She had suspected there would be things that didn't make it to the highlight reel. But this was something else. Zach's voice came through first, his tone bright, rehearsed. "And now, for the toast, we have my beautiful mother." His words lingered in the air like something too polished to be real, too smooth to be genuine. But as soon as he raised his glass, she could hear the shift in his voice. The words that followed felt like daggers, his tone no longer light but mocking, dripping with the arrogance she had seen far too much of lately. "Let's be honest," Zach's voice rang out, a twisted chuckle following immediately after. "She's only here because she paid for the venue." Carolyn's stomach turned as she heard it again. The exact words, the same cruel jibe, echoing through the empty room like a punch to the gut. She closed her eyes, but the laughter that followed in the video only made it worse. The guests, their faces a mixture of confusion and awkward amusement, shifted in their seats. But it was the way Zach smiled, so pleased with himself, so convinced he had made a clever joke, that broke her heart all over again. She paused the video, sitting back in her chair, the sting still sharp against her chest. It was one thing to have been humiliated in public, to sit through that moment. But this was different. This was evidence. This was something she could hold in her hands. The footage continued. The wedding party was shown making their way down the aisle, their smiles tight and forced. Chelsea, standing next to Zach, looked perfect. polished, poised, every inch the image of a bride. But Carolyn noticed something in the footage that she hadn't seen before. Chelsea's parents were sitting in the front row, their expressions smug, almost smugly proud. They looked as if they already knew something the rest of the guests didn't, that they had won, that their daughter had secured what she wanted, that she had everything, without having to lift a finger. Carolyn could feel her jaw tighten. It wasn't just Zach. It was them too. They were all in on it, playing their part in a show she hadn't signed up for. The camera shifted then, moving to another angle, showing the guests' reactions. A few were smiling politely, but most were uncomfortable, their faces strained, their eyes darting around the room as they tried to make sense of what was happening. Amanda's second angle was an unspoken commentary on the tension in the air, capturing the discomfort no one dared address out loud. Carolyn's hand shook slightly as she clicked the mouse, pausing the video again. She had to breathe for a moment, steady herself. She could feel the tension in her body, the anger rising like a tide. It wasn't just the toast. It wasn't just the insults. It was the realization that she had been a fool, that all the years of sacrifice, all the ways she had given of herself, had been thrown back in her face. But now she had something else. She had proof. Proof that would speak louder than any apology. Proof that would show Zach and Chelsea for what they really were. With a sharp breath, Carolyn hit the save button. She saved the video to 3 drives, the first for herself, the second for Deborah, and the third for a rainy day, a backup just in case. As the progress bar filled, she leaned back in her chair, her eyes fixed on the screen. She knew what she had to do. She knew the next move. Deborah's text buzzed on her phone, cutting through the silence. Proof never hurts. Carolyn stared at the words for a moment, a smile playing at the corner of her lips. She didn't need Deborah to remind her. She already knew. The proof was there, all neatly packed into 3 drives, ready to be unleashed when the time was right. She clicked send on her reply. It's all there. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, a small, satisfying chuckle escaping her lips as she thought about how they would react once they saw it. The wedding video, untouched by the usual edits, unpolished, a true record of the day they thought was perfect. The game had shifted, and now Carolyn had the upper hand. The morning light filtered through the blinds of Carolyn's kitchen, casting thin slats of gold across the polished table. Her hands were steady as she stirred her coffee, the steam rising in gentle curls. Today was a day for action, not reflection. She had been stewing over the wedding, over the taunts, over the insults that had been thrown her way, but today, it was time to take control. She picked up her phone, glancing at the text from Deborah that had come through last night. It's all there. Carolyn had shared the wedding footage with her, the uncut version, the one that exposed everything. Deborah's response had been short and simple, but it was enough. It felt like a nod of approval, a confirmation that the next move was ready to be made. With a sigh, Carolyn grabbed her bag and set out. The streets of San Diego stretched before her, bustling with the hum of morning traffic, the scent of the ocean just beyond the horizon. As the city blurred past, Carolyn's mind was clear, laser-focused. The trust lawyer was waiting for her. She didn't have time to second-guess herself now. The office was downtown, a sleek modern building with glass walls that caught the sunlight in sharp, angular reflections. Carolyn felt a familiar sense of discomfort as she stepped inside. It was the same feeling she had when she had first walked into these offices all those years ago, a mixture of pride and unease, the weight of responsibility bearing down on her shoulders. But today, it felt different. This was not about managing wealth. This was about securing her future and making sure Zach and Chelsea had no claim to any of it. The receptionist greeted her with a practiced smile, leading her into a private conference room. The table was made of polished wood, the light from the windows shining down on the papers spread before her. The trust attorney, Mr. Collins, was already seated, his glasses perched on the edge of his nose as he looked over the documents. His face was the picture of professional detachment, but Carolyn knew him well enough to sense that he was curious about what had brought her in today. "Carolyn," he said, standing to shake her hand. "It's good to see you. How can I help today?" Carolyn didn't hesitate. "I'm making changes. I want all my assets moved into a private, irrevocable trust. Immediately." Mr. Collins raised an eyebrow, but he didn't question her. "Of course. I'll get the paperwork ready." "I also want to make sure the beneficiaries are changed," Carolyn continued. "I want 2 charities included, and I want my goddaughter, Emma, named as the primary beneficiary." Collins took careful notes, his pen scratching against the paper. "Understood. And the other beneficiaries?" "Zach will be removed," Carolyn said flatly. "I want him excluded from the trust entirely." There was a pause, just a brief moment, but it felt like an eternity. Carolyn met Collins's eyes, her gaze unwavering. "I want to be protected, legally. I don't want him to have any access to these assets, not now, not ever." Mr. Collins didn't flinch. He was a man who had seen it all: high-profile clients, messy divorces, family disputes. But he knew better than to question her decision. He nodded. "Understood. I'll make sure everything is structured to your specifications." The weight of it all settled into Carolyn's bones. There was no going back now. The pieces were moving into place. As Collins began drafting the legal language, Carolyn pulled out her phone. She texted Tanner, "Finalizing everything. Please make sure the account reassignments are done as soon as possible. I need it locked down." The reply came swiftly. "All set on my end. It's under control. Good." Tanner had been a steady hand, guiding her through the complexities of the financial world. Now everything would be in place. Everything would be locked tight. After a few more minutes of discussing the fine details, the lawyer excused himself to finalize the paperwork. Carolyn sat back in her chair, taking a moment to breathe. It felt right. This was what needed to happen. Zach's entitlement had gone on long enough. He thought the world owed him something. But now, he would see how wrong he was. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Zach. "Hey, we were wondering if we could use the house for a few months." Carolyn's heart skipped a beat as she read the message. Her finger hovered over the screen. The audacity. The sheer, unashamed nerve of him. He thought the house was his to use whenever he pleased, a place he could retreat to when things weren't going his way. She let the message sit there for a long moment, the words burning in front of her. The house. The home she had worked for. The home she had paid off. Her sanctuary. And now he thought he could just waltz in, as though nothing had happened? As though everything was still the same? Her fingers moved, quick and purposeful. She typed a response. "No, the house is no longer available to you. It's mine." She hit send, her pulse quickening as the message flew into the void. She didn't wait for his reply. She didn't need to. This was just the beginning. The trust had been moved. The assets had been protected. And now, there was no turning back. The game had shifted completely. As she gathered her things and stood to leave, Carolyn's thoughts were already moving ahead to the next step. She would have to take care of the final details, but one thing was certain. Zach's world was about to change, and he wouldn't even see it coming. The twist had arrived, and Carolyn was ready. Carolyn sat at the kitchen table, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee mug, the same one she had used for years. It felt like a lifetime ago that this place had been filled with laughter, with warmth, with her family. But that was before Zach's careless words, before Chelsea's cold smile, before the toast that had left her reeling. Her phone buzzed, snapping her back to the present. The text from Zach was still open on the screen, taunting her. She had already responded, but it didn't feel like enough. There was more to be done. There was always more to be done when it came to him. She tapped out another message. The house is no longer in my name. She stared at the words for a long moment before hitting send. A sense of finality settled over her. It had been the first piece of her life she had truly built on her own, the home she had worked for and paid off long before Zach even thought about asking for it. It wasn't just the house. It was the last shred of the illusion that he could walk back into her life on his terms. Not anymore. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Chelsea's response. That's disappointing. The words were blunt, emotionless, like a polite brush-off to an unwanted guest. Carolyn read the message twice, her grip tightening on her phone. Disappointing. That was all she would get? After everything she had given them? After the years of sacrifice? She tossed the phone aside, not needing to read another word. She had nothing left to say to them. The house was hers again. And now it was time to make sure they couldn't touch it, or anything else she had worked so hard for. Carolyn walked through the hallway to the front door. She had already arranged for a locksmith to come and change the locks, but she wanted to be there when it happened. She needed to see the finality of it, to feel the satisfaction of knowing that Zach and Chelsea's easy access to her life had been severed. The locksmith arrived shortly after. His face was impassive as he went to work, switching out the locks on the door and the garage. Carolyn stood back, her arms crossed, watching the process with quiet intensity. Every click of the lock felt like another small victory. Once the locksmith left, she moved to the next step. The house was no longer hers in name, but Carolyn knew it wasn't just about changing the locks. It was about changing the title. She had called Deborah earlier, and now it was time to finalize the paperwork. They met at the office, the paperwork spread out between them on the polished desk. Deborah was quiet, focused, as she helped Carolyn sign the transfer forms. There were protections built in, safeguards that would make it nearly impossible for Zach to gain access to the house again, no matter how hard he tried. I never thought it would come to this, Carolyn said softly, the words escaping before she could stop them. Deborah didn't look up from the papers, but her voice was steady. They never know how much it costs until it's too late. Carolyn nodded, feeling the weight of the truth in those words. She had given everything, and in the end, it hadn't mattered. But now she was taking it back. She was taking control. As Deborah finished the last of the paperwork, Carolyn felt a strange peace settle over her. The battle was far from over. But this was a significant step. The house was hers again. And soon, the final pieces would fall into place. Later that afternoon, Carolyn stood in the foyer, looking out through the glass door at the quiet street. She had one more thing to do. She picked up the box from the table, setting it on the floor in front of the front door. The Ring camera. She had already installed it herself, but she needed to double-check the angle, make sure it captured everything. She spent a few minutes adjusting the camera, pointing it just right, then stepped back and watched as the live feed blinked to life on her phone. It was perfect. Every movement, every visitor would be recorded. She walked upstairs, then paused at the top of the stairs to look out at the view of the backyard. The ocean sparkled in the distance. She had built everything she had with her own hands, and now she would protect it with everything she had. The phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. She looked down, her pulse quickening as she saw the message from Tanner. Accounts are locked down. Everything's safe. Carolyn's lips curled into a smile. The final barrier had been put in place. She stood there for a moment, savoring the silence that stretched between her and the world outside. She had never felt more certain of her decisions. The trust had been moved. The house had been secured. Zach and Chelsea thought they still had a claim on her life. They thought they could still control her. But they had no idea what was coming. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Carolyn turned away from the window. She could already hear the sounds of the evening settling in, the stillness of the house surrounding her like a cloak. The game had shifted. And now, she was ready for whatever came next. Carolyn sat in the dim light of the living room, her fingers lightly tapping on the armrest of the sofa. The house felt emptier now, quieter, as if the weight of the changes she'd made had somehow seeped into the very walls. The final steps had been taken, and she couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. The phone buzzed again, a sharp interruption to the stillness. She glanced down. Zach's name flashed across the screen, and with it, the reminder of what he had done. She could feel the old anger rising again, but this time it was tempered by something else. A coolness, a calm certainty that everything was moving in the direction it needed to. He had left a voicemail. This is all just because of one comment? His voice was strained, his tone accusatory, as if she were the one who had gone too far. Carolyn set the phone on the table, staring at it for a long moment. She knew what the message would be, the same defensiveness, the same entitlement. He hadn't yet realized that this wasn't about one comment. It was about everything that had been building for years, about the constant taking, the never-ending expectations. But it didn't matter now. She picked up the phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. Zach had never understood her. He'd never seen her for what she was, a person who had given, and finally had enough. She tapped the button to listen to the voicemail. His words filled the room, almost suffocating in their familiarity. This is all just because of one comment? Carolyn closed her eyes. His voice had the same arrogance, the same dismissive tone he'd always used with her. The words hit her like a slap in the face, but this time there was no anger, no need to respond. She hit the delete button, watching as the voicemail vanished into the void. There was nothing left to say. No more room for excuses. The past was done. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a direct message from Amanda, the videographer. Carolyn felt her pulse quicken as she opened the message. Everyone still talks about that toast, by the way. Amanda's words were a reminder of just how far-reaching the damage had been. That toast, the words that Zach had thought were so clever, had cut deeper than he ever imagined. Carolyn had known it would get attention, but this, she hadn't expected it to become the subject of conversation for so many people. She couldn't deny the satisfaction that came with knowing Zach's careless words were still being discussed. He hadn't just embarrassed her, he'd embarrassed himself. A small smile crept onto Carolyn's face. She typed a quick reply to Amanda. Good. Let them talk. She put the phone down again, the weight of everything finally starting to sink in. She had taken the steps necessary to ensure her peace. The house was hers. The trust was locked down. And now, no one could touch what she had worked so hard to build. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was Tanner. His message was simple, but the words hit her with the weight of a hammer. The trust is now protected from any disputes. Everything is in place. Carolyn felt a wave of relief wash over her. It was done. Every asset, every part of her life that mattered was now secured. There would be no more meddling, no more attempts to control her. Zach would have no claim on anything. Not the house, not the money, not the future she had built. She exhaled slowly, the tightness in her chest finally loosening. Deborah's text came in shortly after, a photo attached. It was a framed print of a single phrase in bold, clean type. Mic check. 1, done. Carolyn stared at it for a long moment, the weight of the words sinking in. It was Deborah's quiet way of saying that the battle had been fought and won. Zach's attempt to control the narrative had failed. The game had been played, and Carolyn had come out on top. She sat back, her fingers curling around the edge of the sofa as she took a deep breath. The world outside was still, quiet. The soft hum of the house was the only sound now. Zach would never understand. He would never know the price of his words. But that didn't matter anymore. The weight of it all had shifted, and Carolyn felt something she hadn't in a long time: peace. As the phone lay on the table, the silence of the house enveloped her. She was no longer just the woman who had given. Now, she was the one who had taken back what was hers. And Zach? He would have to live with the consequences. Carolyn smiled, her lips curling slightly as she looked out the window, the sun sinking behind the horizon. The future was hers. And this time, no one would take it from her. The sun had long disappeared beyond the horizon, leaving the house wrapped in a cold, quiet darkness. Carolyn sat at the dining room table, the lone light from the lamp casting a soft glow over the papers in front of her. It had been a day of endings, of finalizing the loose ends of her life and watching them unravel. But this one last piece of business, felt like something more. A message, a final punctuation. She slid a folder toward herself, the edge of the paper worn with age. Inside was a loan agreement, $25,000. 3 years ago, Chelsea's father had come to her, pleading for help. "Family always comes first," he had said. She had agreed, writing the check, a small gesture in her mind to help someone she had thought she could trust. But now, as she sat alone at the table, the weight of it hit her. Family didn't just take. They took without ever thinking of giving back. And now, Carolyn was tired of giving. She stared at the document for a long moment, the numbers printed neatly across the page. She could still hear his voice, still see his expression when he asked for the loan, his soft assurances that it would be repaid. And she had believed him. She had believed them both. But no more. A message had been sent earlier to Deborah. "Please draft a repayment demand, with interest." Carolyn had always trusted Deborah to handle the details with precision, and this would be no different. Deborah's reply had been swift, just as expected. "Already working on it." Now, the demand sat before her. The numbers were carefully laid out, the interest calculated, the amount due. Carolyn's fingers hovered over the papers, her pulse steady. The request was straightforward. No emotional weight, no family sentiment, just numbers, just facts. Without a word, she signed her name at the bottom of the page and placed it in the envelope. She felt no hesitation, no guilt. The time for that had long passed. As she sealed the envelope, a strange calmness overtook her. It was like a door had closed behind her, the last remnants of her past, of her kindness, being left in the past where it belonged. She could already hear Chelsea's father's voice in her head, the same words he had used when he begged for the loan. "This is family. You don't charge family." She smirked. "I learned that at your daughter's wedding." The words came out before she could stop them, the bitter taste of them hanging in the air. Family didn't get to make demands when they gave nothing in return. And Carolyn had given enough. She slipped the envelope into her bag and stood, taking a deep breath. The house felt colder now, the weight of her decisions pressing down on her shoulders. But she was no longer the woman who had given everything away. She was the one who took back control. The loan was about to be repaid, with interest. And now, she would watch Chelsea's father squirm, just as Zach would. They'd all see. The phone buzzed on the counter, snapping her from her thoughts. It was a message from Deborah. "Repayment demand is sent. It's official." Carolyn stared at the words, her fingers tightening around this edge of the counter. Official. The finality of it hit her. There was no going back now. She was no longer just the mother who had been trampled under the weight of family expectations. She was the one in control now. And that control? It had a price. a price that would be paid in full. The phone buzzed again, and Carolyn's stomach tightened when she saw Chelsea's name. She hesitated for a moment before opening the message. Dad says this isn't necessary. Your family. You don't charge family. Carolyn's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She tapped out a quick response. No hesitation this time. I learned that lesson at your wedding. She didn't wait for a reply. She didn't need to. The repayment was now official. The final step had been taken. Carolyn leaned back against the counter, the weight of everything settling in. Zach's attempts to control her life had failed. Chelsea's family had failed. Everyone who had expected something from her, taken without giving. They would all learn what it meant to be on the other side of things. The game was hers now, and the price would be paid. In full. Every last cent. Carolyn sat in her study, the soft glow from her desk lamp illuminating the papers before her. The evening had settled in, and she could hear the distant hum of the city beyond the windows, the quiet pulse of life moving without her. But here, in the sanctuary she had built, the place where she had always felt safest, things were different now. The weight of the decisions she had made, the ones that were slowly rewriting her future, pressed heavily on her. The loan repayment demand had been sent, and the silence in the house now felt like a calm before the storm. But Carolyn wasn't afraid of the storm. She had already weathered enough of them. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, eyes scanning the list of charitable organizations her late husband had supported. In the years following his death, Carolyn had taken on the responsibility of continuing his legacy. But now, she was making sure that legacy took on a new shape. A quieter shape, a shape that didn't include Zach. The money he had once hoped to inherit would instead flow toward causes that mattered, to organizations that upheld values she still held dear. She began to type, filling out the donation forms, each one a silent act of defiance. A donation in her husband's name to a cancer research fund, one to the environmental causes he had supported. And then, she typed out another donation, one that would forever change the direction of things. She established a scholarship in her parents' names, people who had always believed in hard work, in earning what you were given. She felt her chest tighten as she clicked the submit button. The money that Zach thought he would one day control was already gone, allocated to causes that aligned with her values, not his expectations. Zach would never know. Not yet. But one day, he would. She leaned back in her chair, the weight of the action slowly sinking in. The peace she had been chasing for so long was finally hers, but not in the way she had imagined. She had done what was necessary. She had created a future that was hers alone, not a future controlled by Zach's demands or Chelsea's icy smiles. She had cut the strings that had tethered her to them for so long. Carolyn's phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Amanda, the videographer who had captured that fateful wedding day. The words felt like a distant echo from another life, but they were still sharp, still relevant. Everyone still talks about that toast, by the way. It's become a bit of a sensation. The words settled into Carolyn's mind with a strange satisfaction. Zach's careless attempt to belittle her had become the very thing that was slowly unraveling him. The toast had started as a joke, a way to put her in her place. Now it was the subject of endless conversations, and with each mention, the truth of it, the ugliness of his arrogance, was slowly coming to light. The whispers were growing louder. She didn't respond to Amanda's message. There was no need. She had already won. The narrative was shifting, and Zach was being painted as the fool. Carolyn felt a flicker of something almost like amusement. How quickly they'd all forgotten that the person they had tried to push aside was the one who had always been in control. Later that evening, as Carolyn settled into her chair with a glass of wine, she received an email notification. It was from a media company, and the subject line made her heart skip a beat. Podcast segment, wedding entitlement, and generational wealth. Carolyn opened it, her eyes scanning the brief message. The segment had gone viral. The speech she had watched Zach give, the toast that had launched everything into motion, had been edited into a podcast. The conversation had taken off, now framing the issues of wealth, family, and expectations. Carolyn's heart raced as she read the follow-up. We would love to have you give a TED-style talk about the role of generational financial boundaries in family dynamics. Her mind raced. This wasn't what she had planned, but the idea, it felt right. The words that had been used against her, the moments of disrespect, had turned into something more. She could use this platform to speak not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been taken advantage of in the name of family. She took a deep breath, leaning back in her chair, her mind already turning over the possibilities. This could be the moment where her story shifted, no longer about vengeance, but about power. The power to reclaim what was taken, the power to change the narrative. The email blinked on her screen, the offer still waiting for her decision. Carolyn hesitated for only a moment before her fingers began to move, typing out her response. I'd be honored. With the click of the button, the final decision was made. The shift had already begun, and now the world would hear her side of the story. Zach would finally understand that he wasn't the only one who had something to say. As Carolyn sat back, the glass of wine now forgotten on the table beside her, she couldn't help but feel the weight of it all begin to settle into place. She had rewritten the rules. She had claimed the narrative. And this time, there would be no going back. Zach and Chelsea had no idea what was coming. The room was packed. It hummed with the low murmur of conversations, the energy palpable, crackling in the air. Carolyn stood backstage, her hand resting lightly on the smooth surface of the podium, the weight of the moment settling into her chest. The stage was set, the lights blindingly bright in front of her, casting long shadows behind. The audience, a sea of expectant faces, waited. They had no idea what was coming, but she did. A deep breath in, steadying herself, and then the stage manager gestured for her to step forward. The microphone clicked on, and the quiet buzz of the room shifted like the sound of a million small moments coming to a still, collective hush. Carolyn stepped into the spotlight, the world outside the circle of light fading. For a moment she felt untethered, as if she were floating between the past and the future. The heavy doors of her life had swung open, and this was her moment. No more silence, no more looking away. The words that had been buried deep within her, the lessons she had learned through years of sacrifice, would now spill into the world. Her voice was calm as she began, the words flowing easily, carrying the weight of everything she had held back for so long. I'm here today to talk about generational wealth, she said, her tone measured but steady. What it means, what it costs, and what it takes from those who are too afraid to question the legacy they've inherited. The crowd was still, listening intently. She could feel the eyes on her, but she didn't flinch. She had prepared for this. The story she was telling wasn't about revenge, though. It was about something much deeper, about the costs of inheritance, not just in money, but in family. The expectations that were passed down like burdens, the unspoken debts that others thought they could collect from those who gave without question. She moved through her story, carefully, sparing the names of those who had wronged her. This wasn't about them. It was about everyone who had been taken advantage of in the name of family, everyone who had given too much and gotten too little in return. The words spilled out like a river breaking free from its banks, raw, unrelenting. I gave because I believed in family, she said, her eyes sweeping the room. I gave because I thought love was enough to overcome anything, but what I learned is that love doesn't always come with gratitude. And when the giving stops, the takers don't stop taking. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. She could see it in their faces. Recognition, realization. They had all been there. All had felt the weight of expectations that weren't theirs to carry. I learned that sometimes the hardest thing is to say no, she continued. The hardest thing is to take a step back and say, I am done. And that's the moment when you realize the people who took from you were never really interested in you. They were only interested in what they could get. A silence lingered in the air, then a single clap broke through. One person, then another, and soon the entire room was on its feet. The applause was deafening, filling every corner of the auditorium with a sound that felt like victory. Carolyn stood there for a moment, her breath caught in her throat. She had done it. She had spoken her truth. And they had heard her. The applause didn't stop. She smiled, a soft, genuine curve of her lips. It wasn't just the validation that felt good. It was the knowledge that her story, her strength, had made its mark. It was over. The years of being silenced, of being the one who gave and never asked for anything in return. They were over. The lights dimmed slightly as the segment ended, and Carolyn made her way backstage, her mind still buzzing with the echo of the crowd's response. The truth was out now. The world would hear it. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of the moment. She grabbed it from her bag, the screen lighting up with notifications. It was a message from Chelsea's cousin. Wow, I had no idea. Carolyn read it again. There was no hint of sarcasm, no coldness, just raw surprise. The walls had been broken and the family had started to see the cracks for the first time. Another message came through, this one from Zach. That talk was about me, wasn't it? Carolyn's fingers paused over the screen as the question sat there, glaring up at her. She could feel the weight of the question, the old power struggle, the push and pull between them. He still didn't get it. He still didn't understand what had shifted. She stared at the message for a long moment. There was a moment of satisfaction in knowing that Zach had heard her, that he had finally seen the truth, even if only for a second. But Carolyn knew better than to engage. The moment for them was long gone. She tapped the screen, typing out a quick response. It's not about you. It's about everyone who's been pushed aside, like I was. Maybe you'll understand one day. She hit send, then placed the phone back in her bag. The message had been sent, and it was now out of her hands. She had spoken her truth to the world, and she had made her stand. The crowd had heard her. Zach had heard her. And now it was time for her to move forward. Her legacy was no longer defined by the family she had given so much to. It was defined by the choices she had made, the strength she had found in herself. And that was a legacy worth living for. The morning came quietly, with only the soft rustling of leaves outside her window to announce the day. Carolyn sat in her favorite chair, looking out at the garden, her mind still buzzing with the events of the past few weeks. The talk had gone well. The applause, the validation. It all felt like a distant echo now, like a wave crashing against the shore and receding back into the ocean. Her phone buzzed, breaking her reverie. She glanced down and saw Zach's name again. She hadn't heard from him since the day of the talk. And now, here it was. A text. She hesitated for a moment but then swiped it open. Can we talk? I'm outside. Her heart stilled. He was here. She hadn't expected him to come, not after everything. Not after the years of distance, of insults, of the sharp edges of their relationship. But here he was, standing on the doorstep of the house she had built and fought for. The house that had once been a symbol of family, of togetherness, now stood as a monument to everything he had taken from her. She didn't move. The doorbell rang then, its chime breaking through the silence of the room like a jarring note. Zach's presence, so bold, So insistent. Felt like an intrusion. He was testing the boundaries again, trying to pull her back into a space where his power still had weight. But not anymore. Carolyn stayed where she was, the stillness of the room wrapping around her like a blanket. She wasn't going to let him in. Not physically. Not emotionally. He had taken his shot, had made his choice, and now it was her turn to stand firm. The doorbell rang again, louder this time, as if he were daring her to answer. But she stayed silent, unmoving. She was done. A few moments later, the ringing stopped. Carolyn sighed, turning back to the window. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't long before she heard the soft crunch of footsteps on the gravel outside. A car door closing. He was leaving. She sat there for a while, the weight of his presence still lingering in the air. But there was no regret, no longing. He had made his choices. Now it was time for him to deal with the consequences. A few minutes passed before her phone buzzed again. A message from Zach. "I left something for you. I'm sorry." She opened the message without hesitation, her eyes scanning the words. It was brief, impersonal. No acknowledgement of the damage he had caused. No apology for the words he had said. No recognition of the harm he had done. Just, "I'm sorry." A hollow apology that meant nothing. She stood up and walked to the door. There, on the doorstep, was a vase of flowers. Bright, expensive blooms in perfect condition. Alongside them, a folded note. Carolyn picked up the note, her hands steady as she read the words. "I'm sorry you felt hurt. I never meant to make you feel that way. But you have to understand, it was just a joke. I never thought it would go this far." The words hit her like a dull thud. There it was. His apology. The words "you felt hurt" leaped off the page as if the pain had been her own fault, as if it had been her own mistake to feel. No ownership. No real acknowledgement of the harm caused. The same old deflection. She could feel the heat of anger rising again, but this time, it was different. She didn't need his apology. She didn't need him to understand. She had already moved on. Without a second thought, she folded the note back up, turned around, and walked to the compost bin in the kitchen. The flowers, the symbol of his hollow gesture, went in first. They hit the compost bin with a soft thud, their bright colors a stark contrast to the mess of yesterday's leftovers. She felt a strange sense of relief as she turned away. That was it. His final attempt at manipulation, his last chance to pull her back into the cycle of guilt and appeasement, had been rejected. She didn't need any of it. Not the apology, not the flowers. Carolyn moved back to the study where her phone sat waiting on the desk. She opened it. Again, this time scrolling through a message from Tanner. "The inheritance split is finalized, ironclad. He has no claim to anything." The words hit her with a strange mix of finality and peace. She had already severed the ties. Everything was set in motion, every loose end tied up. Zach would get nothing. And in the end, that was the most important thing. The phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Deborah. "Another 10K to the shelter. You've made your point." Carolyn smiled as she typed back a quick reply. "Good. Let them see what happens when you stop giving." She stood up, moving toward the window once more. The house was quiet again, the day slipping into the evening. But for the first time in years, it felt like her house, her life, her decisions. Zach would never understand. Chelsea would never see the price of their actions. But Carolyn had already done what was needed. The legacy she would leave wasn't about what she had given. It was about what she had reclaimed. And no one could take that from her. The morning came, calm and gray, with only the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the occasional chirp of birds from the garden to break the stillness. Carolyn sat at the kitchen table sipping her coffee, her thoughts drifting between the events of the past few days. The talk had been a success, the applause still echoing in her mind, but now everything had shifted. The world had finally heard her. Her phone buzzed again, a sharp reminder that the ripples from her actions had only just begun. This time, it was a message from Amanda. Carolyn hadn't spoken to her since the talk, but the name brought a flicker of recognition. She opened the message, her fingers steady. I reposted the uncut wedding video. No edits. It's gone viral. A shiver ran down Carolyn's spine. The video. The one she had tried to forget. The one Zach had thought was a clever little joke, a dig at her expense. The footage from that day, unpolished and raw, had now become a weapon, a powerful statement that couldn't be undone. Carolyn felt a twisted sense of satisfaction as she watched the comments flood in. The video was gaining momentum, spreading through social media like wildfire. The once laughable mockery of her, the toast that had launched everything into motion, was now the very thing that had turned the narrative against Zach. Her phone buzzed again, and again. Comments, shares, tags, all pouring in, faster than she could keep up with. She clicked on a notification, her fingers trembling slightly as she read the words. I can't believe what I'm hearing. This woman deserves so much better than that. Team Carolyn. Another one. How could he do this to his mother? This is so messed up. Justice for Carolyn. The sympathy came like a flood, pouring in from strangers, from people who saw her story, her pain, as something they could relate to. They saw the truth. They saw the injustice that had been done, and they were rallying around her. Zach, once the golden child of their family, was now the villain. Carolyn could feel the weight of the shift, the moment of validation, of vindication, finally arriving. She sat back, the buzz of her phone filling the room as the viral storm continued to brew. The comments were relentless, and Carolyn couldn't help but read them, letting the voices of support wash over her. It was strange, this feeling of being seen, of having her truth recognized by so many. But it wasn't just the comments that gave her a sense of closure. It was the fact that the world had been given a glimpse of the man Zach truly was. His cruelty, his carelessness, was now on display for all to see. A notification flashed. The wedding venue had added a comment of their own. Carolyn Brandt was one of the kindest, most gracious guests we've ever had. We are honored to have hosted her. Clark Class Act. The words hit her like a tidal wave. Kindness, graciousness. They were qualities she had never needed to prove before. But now, in the light of this public humiliation, they were the very traits that would define her in the eyes of everyone who had seen the video. She read it again. She hadn't expected this. The staff had seen the truth. They had witnessed the way she had been treated that day, and now they were speaking up. It felt like a final nail in the coffin for Zach's narrative. The wedding, his carefully curated, picture-perfect day, was no longer his. It belonged to her too. Her kindness, her dignity, had been the true story all along. But then, the backlash came. As the comments continued to flood in, Chelsea took action. Within minutes, Carolyn's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Deborah. Chelsea disabled comments. She's trying to bury it. Carolyn felt a dark chuckle rise in her chest. She knew it was coming. Chelsea, the woman who had always smiled with that cold, practiced grace, was now scrambling to protect her image. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. The video had spread too far, too fast. There was no taking it back. A final notification pinged on her phone. This one was from Zach. I can't believe you did this. You've made me the villain in front of the whole world. I never thought you'd go this far. Carolyn stared at the screen, her heart pounding in her chest. His words were a strange mix of anger and confusion, as if he couldn't understand why this was happening, why his actions had consequences. She felt a rush of emotion, but this time, there was no anger. No need to respond. Just a strange sense of closure. Zach had made his choices, and now he was reaping what he had sown. Carolyn took a deep breath, exhaling slowly as she typed out a reply. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment before she finally hit send. You never understood the price of your actions. Maybe now you will. The message sent, and Carolyn set the phone down on the table. It was over. The storm had passed. And as the waves of public opinion continued to crash around Zach, she felt a strange peace settle over her. The world had seen him for who he truly was. The apology she had never received. The justice she had waited for. It was all here now. Zach would never understand. But that was no longer her problem. The glow of vindication was hers to keep. And no one could take that from her. Carolyn sat at her desk, the hum of the city beyond the window a dull backdrop to the flurry of activity unfolding on her computer screen. The manuscript was coming together, and with it, a new chapter in her life. The words flowed steadily now. The anger, the frustration, the years of giving with no return, all channeling into the pages. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, typing the title that had been swirling in her mind for months, Funded but Forgotten. Stories from the Back Table. It felt almost cathartic, as though each word was a release, a way of exorcising the demons that had haunted her for so long. She had given so much, and for what? To be overlooked, to be ignored, to be used. This book was her way of making sure no one else fell into the same trap. It was a testament to the lessons she had learned the hard way. She had already outlined the chapters. The first was Checkbook Parent, a look at the sacrifices mothers, parents, make in the name of love, only to have their contributions forgotten, their efforts discarded. She typed out the first few lines, the words flowing effortlessly from her fingertips, a truth she had carried for too long finally given voice. Inheritance isn't gratitude was next. A deeper dive into the cruelty of expecting someone else to carry the weight of your decisions, as though inheritance was owed, as though love could be bought. The paragraphs took shape quickly, her thoughts aligned with purpose. Carolyn paused for a moment, leaning back in her chair, eyes closing as she let out a slow breath. She had been through so much, and now, this book would be her declaration, her final statement. Deborah's voice came through on the other end of the phone a few hours later, calm and steady, as always. "You're really doing this, aren't you?" Deborah asked. "Absolutely," Carolyn replied, her voice firm. "It's time to make sure everyone understands what this costs, what it really costs." Deborah had always been her rock, the one who had listened, the one who had pushed her to see beyond the hurt. Now, she would help Carolyn bring it all to the world. "I'm in," Deborah said. "I'll help with the edits." Amanda, the ever-efficient videographer, was on board too, bringing her creative talents to the project. She designed the cover. A stark, elegant design featuring an empty chair at a dinner table, a symbol of the place Carolyn had been left in all those years. It was perfect. The book pre-orders surged almost immediately, a testament to the power of Carolyn's words. The public wanted to hear more. They wanted to know the story behind the woman who had fought so hard, who had finally broken free from the chains of family expectations. As the pre-orders climbed, Carolyn felt a quiet thrill. This was it. This was her moment. But the financial rewards weren't what mattered most. She had made a vow to herself long ago. If she ever got the chance, if she ever reached a place where she could make a real difference, she would give it all away. The profits from the book, every single cent would go to women's housing, to the ones who had been left behind, to those who had never had the chance to speak. As Carolyn typed the final draft of the last chapter, she felt a strange peace. The anger, the hurt. It was all in the past now. This book wasn't about revenge. It was about empowerment. It was about setting the record straight. It was about reclaiming the narrative, not just for her, but for every person who had ever been overlooked, undervalued, and silenced. Her phone buzzed again, and Carolyn looked down. A letter from Chelsea. Her hands tightened around the phone as she read it. Cease and desist. Your defamatory actions regarding the wedding and my family must stop immediately. We will take legal action if you do not comply. Carolyn stared at the words, her heart pounding for just a second. It was what she had expected. What she had been prepared for. She hadn't expected Chelsea to let things go quietly, but she knew better than to back down now. She tapped out her response with cold precision. You can try. It's already too late. She hit send, not a flicker of hesitation in her movements. No longer did she fear their threats, their manipulation. No longer did their words have weight. This was her story, her life, and it would be told on her terms. Carolyn tossed the phone onto the desk, then turned back to the computer. She had barely begun the final paragraph when the doorbell rang. She froze, an inexplicable sense of dread creeping over her. She didn't want to get up, didn't want to face whoever was on the other side of that door. But duty called. She walked slowly to the door, peering through the peephole. Her heart skipped. It was a letter. She opened it carefully, the paper thick, the seal stamped with a logo she didn't recognize. As she read the first few lines, her hands went numb. Dear Ms. Brandt, we regret to inform you that due to the current state of your family's situation, the relationship between you and Zach has led to irreconcilable differences. We are legally required to inform you that Zach and Chelsea have filed for divorce. Carolyn's heart pounded. She couldn't quite process it at first, the words swirling around in her mind. Zach and Chelsea were getting divorced. Her mind raced, her fingers still trembling as she read the letter again. It was almost too much to take in. She had known, on some level, that they were holding on by the thinnest of threads. But this was different. This was the kind of chaos that Zach had always ignored, the kind that had been building beneath the surface. Carolyn sat down at the desk, staring at the letter. She had been ready for so much. But this was the final twist in the story she never could have predicted. The game had shifted yet again. And this time, she had no idea what would happen next. Carolyn's phone buzzed again, the faint vibration pulling her from the haze of shock she was still wrapped in. She stared at the screen, seeing Chelsea's name flash before her. She didn't need to open it to know what it was. Another apology, another attempt at damage control. But this time, there was no public humiliation, no toast, no speech. It was just raw emotion, a woman scrambling to salvage what was left of her crumbling facade. Carolyn had already heard enough from Chelsea. The last thing she needed now was a tearful voicemail. But still, Carolyn hesitated. She picked up the phone and unlocked it, the message appearing in front of her. She clicked play, her finger trembling just slightly as the sound of Chelsea's voice filled the room. Carolyn, I don't know what happened. I never meant for it to go this far. I never wanted you to feel hurt. The voice cracked, the rawness seeping through. There was no mistaking the strain, the desperation in Chelsea's words. Please, we need to talk. I'm sorry for everything. Please. The words echoed in Carolyn's mind. She didn't move. The phone pressed lightly against her ear as the message ended. Chelsea had broken. That much was clear. The veneer of control, the cool, calculated nature of the woman Carolyn had once thought of as her daughter-in-law, had shattered. Now, Chelsea was just a woman on the other side of a broken marriage, fighting to make sense of the fallout she had caused. Carolyn took a slow, steadying breath. She was done being the one who fixed things. Done being the one who patched up the holes left by people who never cared enough to repair the damage they caused. With a calm certainty, Carolyn opened the contact info for Chelsea's number and hit block. No more messages. No more guilt trips. No more manipulation. The doorbell rang just as Carolyn set the phone down. This time, she didn't flinch. She had a feeling she knew exactly who it was. She opened the door to find Zach standing there, his shoulders slumped, his eyes sunken with exhaustion. There was no arrogance in his posture now, no confidence, just the weight of someone who had finally been broken down. His eyes flicked over her, hesitating for just a moment before he spoke. "Carolyn, I've lost everything." His voice cracked, the words barely above a whisper. "The house, the money, Chelsea and I, we—" "Save it," Carolyn interrupted, her voice cold, a steady calm that radiated from her like an invisible shield. "You made your choices." Zach's face twisted in frustration, as though he were desperate for some form of redemption, some chance to explain himself, to make her understand. "I never meant for any of this. I didn't want it to end like this, but—" His voice faltered again. "I was wrong. I've lost everything." Carolyn stepped aside, motioning for him to enter, but not inviting him in. She moved toward the desk, her fingers reaching for the manuscript she had been working on. She picked it up, the weight of it grounding her. "I'm not interested in your excuses," she said, turning back to him. "But maybe now you'll understand the cost of your actions." She handed him the manuscript, the words printed clearly on the pages. "This is how the world will see you. And I hope, for your sake, that it teaches you something." Zach stared at the manuscript in his hands, his mouth opening as though he were about to speak. But then he closed it, the weight of her words settling over him. He didn't look up at her as he took the book, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that might have been regret. Or perhaps it was just fear. He nodded silently, then turned and walked out the door, leaving Carolyn alone once again. She didn't need to watch him leave. She didn't need to feel anything for him. He had made his choices, and now the consequences were his to face. As the door clicked shut behind him, Carolyn felt a small, unexpected weight lift off her chest. It was over. He was gone, and she was free. The phone buzzed again. This time it was Deborah. "Are you okay?" Carolyn read the message, her fingers hovering over the keys. She paused, then typed back, "I'm better than okay. I'm done." She set the phone down, standing still for a moment, allowing herself to just breathe. She had taken back control. The book was a success. The inheritance was secure, and the toxic relationships that had held her back were gone. Later that evening, she received a text from Tasha, one of the few people who had always supported her. "Let's do dinner. Real friends, real peace. No more drama, just us." A smile curled on Carolyn's lips as she typed a quick reply. "I'll be there." She knew she had a long road ahead, one filled with new opportunities and the potential for real healing. But for the first time in years, she felt like she was moving forward on her own terms. No more manipulation, no more regret. As the day faded into night, Carolyn sat at her desk once more, her fingers resting lightly on the keyboard. She had already written the book. She had already spoken her truth. But now there was nothing left to prove, nothing left to explain. And for the first time in a long time, Carolyn smiled, knowing that the legacy she was creating would be hers alone. The evening air was crisp as Carolyn stepped into the venue, the soft clinking of glasses and the low hum of conversation swirling around her. She hadn't expected to be here. She hadn't expected any of this. The fundraiser, the attention, the acknowledgement. But here she was, standing at the entrance of a room filled with strangers and familiar faces, all of them gathered to raise a glass to her. To her impact. The event was a far cry from the wedding. There were no grandiose speeches or awkward toasts. no one making her the punchline of a joke. This was different. The space was elegant, understated, and the atmosphere felt warm, genuine. A stark contrast to the place she had once occupied in her son's life. She moved through the room with a calm grace, the eyes of the crowd following her with respect. People who had heard her talk, had read her book, had seen the way she had reclaimed her life, now saw her as something more than just a parent who gave and gave. Now they saw her as a force in her own right. It was humbling, surreal even. Tanner was standing off to the side, his usual meticulous appearance now punctuated with a small but sincere smile as he watched her approach. His eyes sparkled with something deeper than professional admiration. It was pride. For once, Carolyn didn't mind being the center of attention. She deserved this. To Carolyn Brandt, the host called, raising a glass. The room fell into silence for a brief moment, all eyes on her. A woman whose strength, resilience, and grace have shaped not just her family, but all of us who have had the privilege to witness her journey. A round of applause rippled through the crowd, and as glasses were raised, Carolyn allowed herself to smile. This was different. This wasn't the applause of a woman humiliated. This was the applause of someone who had taken her narrative back and had made sure it was heard, loud and clear. She stood there for a moment, her heart still, her thoughts distant. Then, the host stepped aside and the microphone was handed to her. She took it in her hand, the cool weight of it a reminder of all the stages, all the moments, all the silences she had endured. This was her stage now, her words. "Thank you," Carolyn began, her voice steady, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. "I never expected to be here. I never expected to be the subject of a toast or a celebration. And I certainly didn't expect to be the punchline of a joke at my son's wedding." She paused, allowing the laughter to wash over her, the collective recognition of how far she had come, how far they had all come from those awkward moments. "But here I am," she continued, her tone shifting, becoming more deliberate, more powerful. "And I've learned a few things along the way. We all have a choice to inherit habits, traditions, patterns of behavior that may not serve us, or to rewrite them, to redefine what's possible, what's fair, and what's right." The room was silent now, the words sinking deep into the hearts of those who had gathered. "I've had to rewrite a lot of things in my life, and I've learned that sometimes rewriting those things means walking away, not out of anger, but out of necessity. Because no one can make a life for themselves while still carrying the weight of others' mistakes." Her eyes found Tanner in the back of the room. He was nodding, his expression proud but thoughtful. Amanda stood nearby, her camera still rolling, capturing the moment for posterity. Deborah was at the table near the back, her hand resting on her glass as she squeezed her own, as if to say, "You did it." Carolyn's voice softened, but the weight of it still carried. "I've spent too many years giving, too many years trying to fix things that weren't mine to fix. But now I'm done trying to patch up other people's mistakes. I'm here to live my own life, to write my own story." Another round of applause, a little louder this time, a little more heartfelt. And then, the moment came. The one Carolyn had been waiting for. The one that would tie this whole experience together. "I'm not standing here because of some grand gesture," she said. "There's no wedding, no microphone, no punchline, just respect. For myself. And for what I've built." She let those words linger in the air for a moment before setting the microphone back on the stand. As she made her way back to her seat, Deborah rose to meet her, her hand gently squeezing Carolyn's in support. "You did it," she said softly, her eyes filled with unshed tears. Carolyn smiled back, feeling the warmth of the moment fill her chest. "I did," she replied, her voice steady. Sure, for once, it was my turn, no one else's. The evening continued, the energy in the room building as more people came forward, more glasses raised, more stories shared. But as the night wore on, Carolyn found herself sitting at the table, watching the crowd from a distance. The messages, the attention, the applause, it didn't matter anymore. This wasn't about validation. This wasn't about proving anything. This was just the start of a new chapter, one where she could live fully and freely. The weight she had carried for so long had finally been set down. And now, there was only one thing left to say. He toasted me as a joke. I left him the bill. And with that, Carolyn felt the last of the chains that had bound her break free. She wasn't the woman who had been forgotten anymore. She was the woman who had taken back everything she was owed, and more.